Um, it's kind of like not the most. There's some like glorious parts to it, but it's not the most glorious initiation, you could say. So a while back, I was partaking in the production of growing marijuana, and because of my experience with my great grandmother on my mom's side, and just her stories, I came to a stopping point that was kind of an issue, which is how to optimize my plant growth in the fashion that I wanted, utilizing whatever tools I can get my hands on. And it started using inorganic fertilizers, and I reached a certain point in that and realized that I didn't really agree with it. I didn't really understand why this was needed and that was needed, and so to actually fully conceptualize plant growth, I needed to actually learn about plant growth. I couldn't just look at one plant and say that I can optimize this plant without any relation to any other plants. It's kind of a narrow mindset, and it was focused on particularly just cash, to be honest with you. So it's not the most glorious initiation, but it became glorious and virtuous for me when I discovered this community that was dedicated to opening that door to organic farming, and not just in the fashion of cannabis and trying to keep up with the industry at its growth rate, but also how to protect your own land, how to utilize everything on your land to optimize your plant growth or your farming. And whatever you farm, whether it's strawberries, whether it's hay, whether it's potatoes, it became an eye-opening event for me when I discovered this community through a series of conferences, and it illuminated to me that I had no idea at all what I was doing. I was essentially just doing what was conventional at the time and assuming that the conventional knowledge was going to take care of me and or make me successful. But it was the contrary. In fact, it took years of studying research papers and finding these experts in vermiculture, soil biology, specifically indigenous, natural, organic farming practices that were founded in Korea and expanded over to a bunch of different lands like Hawaii. I would say probably my favorite is probably the one that we least understand. From our, I guess, or not our, but I guess as a human race, our research done in the Amazon and in South America, there is this constant recurrence of seeing like an agricultural land. In this land, there's these pits that seem to be burned and layered in organic matter, sometimes even bones or maybe even life or dead creatures. And it has developed a rich soil, but we don't really understand how they made it yet. That's probably my favorite, but just because it's a mystery. I guess my second favorite would probably be the most, in my eyes, probably the most easiest composting method that a person could grasp, which would be the bioreactor method of composting, or known as the Dr. Sue and Johnson method. And essentially, that method of composting is directly, or rather its motivation is to produce a fungally dominated compost in the most efficient way, which is creating a I guess, like a normal compost pile, caging that pile and placing empty PVC pipes and drilling holes in between all of those pipes and at the top as well. And once you stick those PVC pipes in the middle of the compost pile, it essentially speeds up the process of oxidization. So the excess air that these PVC pipes produce helps the process or composting process maintain its aerobic nature. Once things start to turn anaerobic, which is without air, lots of diseases can occur unless a certain plant is genetically optimized to utilize an anaerobic material. Generally, it's toxic. So I will start in a different way, other than just compost. I would start with first growing in your soil, breaking up the compaction, is getting some type of rhizosphere developed into the soil, some type of roots development. And as you're composting, in that process is probably going to take a couple weeks, if not a few months, depending on if you're doing a thermophilic, which is just using heat or the natural heat of the fertilizer to compost the material. You're going to need some time. And if you just place compost without those things, you're going to get an anaerobic environment. So you need a plant to utilize that compost, in a sense. Unless this was during this time, ideally what I would do is place compost now or before the winter starts. And then during the winter process, it's going to be a naturally occurring composting that is done every year, that the earth does by itself, which is kind of cool. But once spring hits, that composting method has developed over, 3 or 6 months, something like that, depending on where you live. When that spring hits, your growing season is going to be optimized. So if it's like a growing area, I would start with like a 3 to 4 inch height across that bed. And you have to be careful with compost. As a general rule, if it's not ideal compost, it's going to lead to disease. You wouldn't take an idle probiotic. Imagine if you needed an inoculum in your system and a doctor gave you a probiotic and it did nothing. And essentially you just got worse because your problem developed over time. And so if you don't have a fertilizer that is actually balanced in the organisms that it exists in, like the nematodes, the protozoa, the flagellates, the amoebas, some of the predatory organisms you can't get without a rhizosphere, without a root system, which is why I said you need that root system developed initially at first, because some of the predatory organisms you can't get without that system in place. So it's going to be a hand-in-hand relationship. But if it's just your run-of-the-mill compost trapped in a bag for 6 months, I can bet you it's not doing any good. It's probably doing more harm than is good. And that's kind of like the mindset behind life and then producing death, in a sense. To my surprise in my journey, I actually was unaware of how deep it was in my family. My great-grandmother on my mother's side, she essentially fed more than 8 people off of a backyard garden. And so that's why I was so confused with trying to figure out how to optimally grow cannabis. And I'm thinking to myself, how did my grandmother grow enough food, nutriently dense food, for more than 8 people, and I can't optimally grow this cannabis the way that I like to enjoy cannabis? It just didn't make sense to me. And then I thought that she didn't have these tools that I'm using currently. And so obviously there's a disconnect. But to my surprise, when I kind of did some research into my family history, I reached out to my great-grandmother on my father's side, who actually owned a produce shop with her husband. And so it wasn't until like years later did it kind of hit me that like there was a history or some type of like epigenetic memory in me that's just attracted to plants. But that has kind of pushed me to continue to do what I'm doing and to improve upon it. Because we've kind of been lied to for like the past 100 years. Like, they say the industrial movement has spawned this technological movement. It's kind of a fucking lie. It started the curse, but it hasn't improved much. It's improved our ability to not, it's improved our ability to ineffectively communicate. It's improved commerce. It's barely improved farming. But it's important because we need to know that you shouldn't be buying all the sauces that you buy. You should make all the sauces that you make. We have to get from this idea that we have to buy things. Yes. There's a push to keep this narrative that the Industrial Revolution and technological revolution needs to continue with as much of the force as it's began with. And the reason why I say that is because it benefits a small collective of people, but it neglects the majority of people. The more and more that we become further away from this natural, I guess, mindset, we forget. And it's a tragedy when that tradition is lost, whether due to like mining for materials like lithium to produce in our phones. And this revolution from this industrialized mindset is being transferred over and over, and it's more brutal and brutal. And there's more subversive methods that I guess you could say in the Western world participates in that. And so beyond the sauces, everything in our life probably doesn't come from our country, let alone our state. And it's not a bad thing, but if it isn't sourced correctly, how is that affecting that environment in whatever country that is? And most countries are trying to optimize themselves to become westernized, which is brutalize their people, in a sense, oppress them for the benefit of commerce. And so in places, in southern countries in Africa, pirates exist because governments are oppressing the people by saying that they can't farm the fish. But the governments themselves will give permits to the high-rises in their capitals, and they'll make sure that those fish get farmed, and they'll deplete them for the purpose of commerce. And so we'll say that the Industrial Revolution is creating these environments where people can have clean water, sewage, whatever, but at what cost is all of these things occurring? And it's at a small level to say sauces, but it's at a deeper level to think that you're going to continue to buy all of this technology and it's not going to hurt anybody. The same way that you can't continue to think that you're going to keep buying products and it's going to benefit your life in any way. I don't care how healthy it seems. I don't care what the marketing is. If at the end of the day, the company isn't trying to offer a solution, if not help you educate yourself, the purpose of that product isn't going to help you in your life. It's just going to continue to induce this mindset that you need to buy things in order to sustain yourself in this life. It benefits a collective of people to be this advanced environment or collective of individuals, but unless you have access to those resources in abundance, and you forget how to create your own fire, you forget how to create your own food. It's kind of sad that you lost that tradition over time simply for the comfort of convenience. Yeah, research Dr. Elaine Ignum. If you want to learn how to start yourself or immerse yourself in this environment, in this knowledge base, start with her. She's hasn't gotten a lot of her flowers yet, but she's a rock star. She has dedicated her life to fighting against Monsanto, agricultural companies that try to, in a sense, just hurt the earth. And to shorten it, in my love for her, I will give a shout out to her, a shout out to my grandmother, and or grandmothers, and a shout out to Earth Intersect.